we want to welcome everyone to this bi-monthly event that we have for everyone. So Strategic HR Next Practice Monthly calls. Let's go to the next slide, Zeta, so we can get right into the housekeeping stuff. For those who are, since we opened these to the public, there are people on this call that we know might be the first time you're happening upon this. You may not know about I4CP, but we are a human capital research firm and that studies the people practices of high performance organizations. And all of our research, next slide please, Zeta, what makes our research unique is that we are constantly correlating back to 5-year growth rates of organizations in all of our studies around market share, profitability, customer satisfaction, revenue growth. In other words, we study human capital through the lens of the business, not through the lens of HR. And as a result of that, our member organizations, and you'll see that in just a moment, have exclusive access to our research that says of all the things that you're studying, could be performance, could be culture, could be new ways of work, hybrid work, you name it. Here's what distinguishes the high performance organizations from low. And we also run all types of analysis on the data to find out, do those practices actually correlate back to market performance? And as a result, it allows us not just to discover best practices, but next practices. And next practices are those practices that have very strong positive correlation to market performance, but are not yet widely adopted by organizations. And these are ones that we tell our member organizations, hey, these aren't shiny objects that we think are going to fade away. These are ones to put a pin in it and figure out when it's best within your strategy, how to pursue it. And very fortuitously, the next practices we've been calling out over the last several years are ones that are really hitting the pavement right now. And these are some of the member organizations. And I know that there are many members on this call, so we thank you for your support. And if you're not a member but are interested, please let us know and we'll be happy to send you information. All right, with that, let's get into the good stuff here. And so I am Kevin Martin. I'm the head of research at I4CP. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's even more of a pleasure that I'm joined by my co-host and one of my teammates, Carrie Naiman. Carrie, hello.
Hello, everybody. My name is Carrie Naiman, and as Kevin mentioned, I am also part of the research team, and Kevin and I co-host these calls once a month. Is that right? I don't even know what the cadence is, but pretty frequently. Anyway, yeah. So thanks everybody for coming, and we're really excited about the conversation today. It's going to be a good one for sure. No pressure, Lisa.
Yeah, exactly. And for those of you who, especially for those who are not I4CP members, these are calls coming up here over the next month that are open to the public. And if you'd like to join, or if you've got someone on your HRLT that you think would benefit by joining one of these calls, by all means, just go to I4CP/company/events and you'll be able to register for those. And Zeta just put that, thank you, Zeta, for doing that. And Zeta, if you could advance, please. So one of the things that we also wanted to make people aware of is every year we have what we call our Next Practice Now conference. And this is an annual event. We were thrilled that this past year in March, we were able to host it in person. It was extraordinary. It's the #1 rated HR event in the world. And by the surveys that we put out, our members have told us it's #1 over any other event they've attended. So we take that very seriously. There are no vendors, no consultants allowed. And that's not a slam against the vendor and consultant community. It's just that by doing so, we ensure that the high level audience that's there can talk about whatever they want. And it's a very open forum, and we have incredible speakers there as well. So feel free to look into that. And next. All right, the last thing we'll do before we get into our guest is we have a report that we published recently with Fortune Media that we call the Talent Imperative. And we know that this is the foremost agenda item globally in aggregate among CEOs, beyond inflation, beyond supply chain issues, beyond geopolitical events. And so this report, there is a public version of the report that we made available, and Zeta has just put that into the chat feature as well. So with that all behind us, let's dive into the good stuff here. And we'll introduce Lisa Manzone from one of the best tasting companies in the world, McCormick Company. And Lisa, you are a member of our Chief HR Officer Board, which we are so happy that you're a part of that. You add so much value to that, and trust that you get a lot of good value as well. But we're just so thrilled to be able to feature you. Welcome to the hot seat.
Yes, it is the hot seat. So I'm feeling it a little bit, but I'm putting my trust in yours and Carrie's capable hands. So.
Well, that sounds good. Be careful of Carrie. She's known for a zinger or two, but that's, she's super sharp. So that's why, that's part of the value she brings to the equation. Hey, Lisa, as we get started here, can we just start a little bit about you? You've been with McCormick for 15 years, and
right.
and you are the head of HR. I find it interesting that it's called Human Relations, by the way, at McCormick. Maybe you could talk about McCormick for those who aren't familiar, and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again for having me. I'm really honored to be here. And to all of you on the call who have spoken before me, I now really appreciate the opportunity that is being afforded here. So yeah, just a little bit about me. I have been with McCormick for 15 years. As I was looking back on my career in preparation, I've been in HR for over 30, which is a little crazy. After graduating from Michigan State in the late 80s. And I am a Michigander. We were having this conversation earlier. Kevin grew up in Ann Arbor and Carrie in Wisconsin. So we've got some Midwest Big Ten roots on the call. But I started in HR. I was at an internship with an automotive company because why wouldn't I be with an automotive company growing up in Michigan? And one of my first opportunities as an intern was to do some things, just general intern things. And there was a process going on, and there was just a lot of conflict between the union employees and management. And at that time, during that internship, what really sparked me way back then was there's got to be a better way, and just really got me thinking and really got me energized and engaged in the human resources profession all those years ago. And it's really been, I think, a North Star for me all the time, which is there's got to be a better way, and how we think about that. And I always joke, my mom was in HR, my dad's an engineer. So I have this split personality of process and people. And, the combination of those in terms of how both organizations and the people in them can be mutually successful is just something that drives me and how I think about things here today in this. And I think human relations, it's interesting. We had, right when I got to McCormick, we started talking about, do we change it? Because human resources was the better known terminology, and would it keep us from attracting people to our function and our company? And at that time, probably 12, 13 years ago, we said no, because it is, for McCormick, which is based in the power of people, a very important differentiator for us as we think about our function and think about how we go about our work in the organization.
That's so interesting, and it really resonates, because I think so many, if we were to look right now, I'll bet you if we rose I would encourage people in the chat. How many of you recently have gone from being like a chief HR officer to a chief people officer, or a chief people and culture officer in that regard? And here you are using almost, I think a lot of people could say, boy, that's an outdated term, but you're saying, no, it never mattered more than now, that relational piece, and you're going to stick with it and let that drive the experience.
Yep. Yeah, it really does. You think about it differently automatically, and it's really a foundational piece to HR and McCormick.
That's awesome. Carrie, I want you to come off mute before you self-implode. We need you to jump in here. And I know we're going to show a slide here that gives a little bit of background on McCormick here as well. But Carrie, anything interesting that you wanted to surface level?
Well, I also just wanted to say, I thought the human relationship thing was interesting, and because I saw that on your title as well. And I do think it's one of those things that's going to come around again. Like, it does sound just immediately to me like, it's been around a while. And on the other hand, it is coming back. Not that it hasn't always been about people, but what more important thing can we talk about right now, except for people relating to each other, you know?
Exactly. And this whole area of connectedness and how we're doing that. And, the focus that we all know that, has exponentially increased over the past 36 months around, everything is about people. And,
Right.
we've talked about it amongst the CHRO meeting, just around, the soft stuff is the hard stuff. And it really is that continued focus. And I just got off a call earlier this morning talking about our long-term plan, and it's all about the employee experience. It's about managerial skill building and empathy and all of these elements that are really
Well-being,
coming
right?
back.
All that. Yeah.
Well-being,
Yeah.
absolutely at the forefront.
Yeah, I mean, all of this makes so much sense. I think, let's go, Zeta, if you wouldn't mind clicking once. We've got a slide here, and Lisa, this way you can kind of educate people about
Yeah.
McCormick and help us understand too. Very interested in knowing the breakout of your employees from those that you would consider almost like frontline on, having to work on site versus those that might be a little bit more able to work more off-site or remote or hybrid, and your approach to that too.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll just start with a little bit of, I guess, education. Hope everybody certainly knows our consumer brand and uses those on a daily basis. But McCormick is 6.3 billion in sales as of the end of last year, which is obviously a great number. And, it's certainly our goal to continue to grow. And our CEO has said multiple times, we want to double the value of our company as we think about our share price and the other value levers within a 10-year period of time. So it's a very clear pursuit. We are in 170 countries, which is pretty amazing. And we have manufacturing operations and joint ventures in 27. Of the 14,000 employees that we have, approximately, I'm going to say 3,500, 4,000 are what I would call virtual eligible employees, with the remainder being our online frontline manufacturing employees, as well as our R&D groups who need to work on site, and then other types of roles that are, I think, more machine based or more equipment based that need to come in on a regular basis. We actually have what we call My Flex. It is an opportunity to work up to 50% virtually if you're in eligible roles and over a given month. So we tried to make it as flexible as possible, but also providing some framework for attendance in the office. But I will be transparent in saying we've been doing it for a year. It launched July 15th of last year. And so we were sort of out in front, getting us back in the office. And we're right now in the process of saying, what's working, what's not, and what are some other things that we can learn from other companies as it relates to the time in the office, and trying to reconsider how we're thinking about that.
What are you learning, just off the cuff? We didn't talk about that in the prep, but I'm just kind of wondering what are you getting in terms of signals?
Yep. So people, those who are eligible want more flexibility. There's an element of a bit of a gap between, understanding moments that matter, but being able to implement moments that matter on a regular and valuable basis. We've been looking at things that, how do we reframe our conversation about not trying to recreate an on-site environment virtually, but understand how and why virtual is good and how we leverage that more specifically. So we're trying to reframe how we think about it. And, and also we just still have some basic, is it being used consistently? Whether it's from a manager perspective, from an employee perspective, and, so where are some of those gaps? So we're very much in the process. We've done 2 surveys around it. But consistently about consistency, wanting more flexibility, trying to understand how to make it work. Challenges around, still time zones and work hours. We're still facing some of those stressors on the organization as well, because it's still sort of a 24/7 model right now.
Have you found anything, Lisa, that is working really well that you can, from especially that working flexibly, or especially even on the frontline worker side,
Right.
that you could share out?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to say, from the employee feedback perspective, 75% of those who are able to enjoy the flexible work think it's working well, from an overall perspective. So I would say that overall it's working in terms of what we intended it to do. People are getting more, I'll call it, what do I want to say, educated and improving at using the tools that we have. So, if we think about Microsoft Teams, which is our tool, the continuation of understanding how to use the whiteboarding, how to use the other pieces. We have something called Work Viva on our Microsoft Outlook. So you can, trigger your emails not to send things at off hours and only do it, within working hours of the person you're sending it to. So we're continuing to try to improve that type of awareness around how people need to work together. And then also, people just feel that from a productivity perspective, having that flexibility and that opportunity to manage their schedule on a regular basis has been a real positive. So that's where we're seeing it. I will say, and I think my poll question will ask a little bit about this, but one of the things is just around, there's still, and we've talked about it in these forums before, the further away you get from the work, the harder it is to think that this hybrid thing is a good idea. And so, how do we use technology to also help support us in also reinforcing with the organization that people are more productive, more engaged, if they have more flexibility and control, and all of those things lead to greater productivity and greater success.
Those measures and that ability to connect, that is so critical, especially
Yes.
going back to the line leaders and the executives, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, maybe this is the ideal time, Lisa. You just brought up the poll question. And so Zeta, if you wouldn't mind, if we have the poll question, if you can launch that. And but there's what Lisa, why don't you tell us? I mean, just here's the poll question that we co-created, but what are you hoping to glean here?
So yeah, thank you very much again for the opportunity to ask this of so many colleagues. One of the things that certainly we're continuing to learn and discover is, the technology at the center of everything, right? So digitization, how do we, and so from our perspective, it's how do we implement and understand the technology that is most beneficial to our processes, to our people, to our effectiveness, to our efficiency. And there's so many different places that you can invest. And so from a prioritization perspective, that's what we're talking about right now, is where do we need to invest in technology that seems to be either the biggest gap or have the most impact in a world of finite resources and certainly finite budget. So that was what I was hoping to glean, to see where people may be investing, and also understanding then what people's priorities might be in this space.
That's wonderful. So let me just tee this up. We would love to have someone come off mute who is, who answered on behalf of their company, and tell us why you answered the way you did. And especially if your company is one that operates, across many geographies, that would be wonderful. And so let's look at the reaction here. And Lisa, as we start to, can you see the results?
I can.
Okay. Does anything in particular stick out to you from what you see here?
I think it's interesting that the virtual and hybrid working systems are lower than what I would have expected. I'm not surprised about talent acquisition. I think in this day and age when this is such a focus, so I'm not surprised at that. glad to see the learning and development where they are. I think that is, that's a critical component of that. But yeah, I would just say I would have thought the virtual and hybrid would have been a little higher in terms of how organizations are continuing to try to understand how we best interact in so many different ways across so many different locations, time zones, et cetera.
I just wonder whether or not that's lower because we've had 2.5, 3 years to sort
of doing it. Yep, absolutely.
Now it's like, okay, now we actually need to figure out how to do the business with these tools, right? So
exactly. That's a great point too.
So one of the, and I want to ask Kate, Kate Krasnokutska. Hopefully I didn't butcher your last name, Kate, but you had mentioned about knowledge management. Would you mind coming off mute and just sharing a bit about what you're doing? Okay. Maybe Kate didn't hear me, but she had mentioned knowledge management, which I think is interesting.
It is interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I'll tell you what kind of surprised me here is not her sound is not working. All right. And so we've got we'll get to Elena, we'll get to your question in just a moment here. The productivity piece, I agree with Carrie. I think probably a lot of companies have done that in the past couple of years, have invested in that. The TA Talent Act, no surprise there. We see that. In fact, we just asked a question in our study that we did, the Talent Imperative, which was a global study, 77 countries represented, over 1,000 different executives took part in it. But what we found is that HR investment is strong, and where the strongest investment's going to, or where most companies are investing, number one area was TA. Yeah. What surprised me on here actually was the mobility job mapping piece of internal talent marketplace. We really believe very much that the ability to enable people to discover their next opportunity, to be discovered within that firm, and to really map people with different opportunities is a significant area of opportunity for companies to tap into. And so to see only 7% pick that as a top 2 is somewhat surprising, but we did only limit it to top 2, frankly. So maybe not.
Right.
And I'm just thinking maybe just with that comment, I know, Lisa, when we talked earlier, we talked about this dynamic allocation of resources that you're all working on. It feels like that might be a good segue just to kind of share how you're thinking about talent in that regard.
Yeah. So I think I was just going to mention too, I think, right, part of it probably for me is, there's been such a lockdown of everything, right? Mm-hmm. So for the past couple of years as well, in terms of mobility of any kind. And so thinking about, how then, to your point, do we think about our resources differently? So what Carrie mentioned around dynamic allocation of resources, and maybe just if we look at the 4 growth behaviors that that McCormick is implementing, I could give a little background on that, and then talk about how we've done that in a couple of our initiatives. But we have
that's in the deck, Zeta. Just as you're flipping.
Sorry, 2. Yeah, I think it's 2 more
growth behaviors. Yep, one more.
Go one more.
Nope, one more. There we go.
There we go. So about 5 years ago, we began a conversation. It was actually at our diversity and inclusion town hall meeting, and we had a speaker by the name of Franz Johansson of the Medici Group speak to us about innovation through inclusion. And from that conversation, and one of our principles being driven to innovate, and another one being power of people, we saw a really great opportunity to link those 2 things and say, how can we continue to drive our innovation and growth agenda? What behaviors are really important for us to be able to do that? So through partnership with the Medici Group, we created what you're seeing here on the screen, which are the McCormick growth behaviors, which have now been in place for about the past 4 years. And it's been actually one of our most successful implementations of learning and behavioral change that we've done in the organization over the period of time that I've been there. And so of these 4 growth behaviors, and they're all optimally working together to be able to do to make an organization operate in its most effective manner, focused on growth and innovation. One of them is dynamically allocating resources, and it's the constant question of, do I have the people I have focused on the right things? And it's a tough one, right? And I would say it's the toughest one that we have of these four behaviors. It forces the conversation around how agile is our organization to be able to take people from one thing and put them on another, and then figure out what to do behind that movement. And so one of the ways that we've utilized this concept is in a large scale ERM project. So we're going through a large technology transformation where we have had to take people from the organization and put them 100% on this multi-year cross-functional project that is spanning the globe over a period of 6 years. And some we have had to backfill because there were skills that we just really needed to backfill. But we've got over 200 people on this full-time project. And so thinking about then how we backfill them, not in kind necessarily, but also then allows us to have the organizational discussion of, do you need the role? What kind of role do you really need? What other opportunities are there for the team or the organization to develop people, to move people, to reassign people? And it's really continuing to, we're not all the way there yet in terms of being able to do it automatically and all the time, but I'm really pleased that it's continuing to help us drive this conversation about thinking about every time there's an opportunity to have an opening, it should be an opportunity to have a conversation about whether or not that organization or that team or that group of people is operating optimally and focused on the right things. So it also, with the constantly reframing, it helps you rethink about your priorities, right? So then you have to start to think about, well, what is my priority? Are my priorities switch? So it's much more of a dynamic way of thinking about daily, weekly, monthly work than sort of, I think, the long ago, right? Here's our goal and we're heading down this path. And I liken it a little bit to that, sort of agile thinking, the design thinking models. It's a little bit in that vein too. And this is how we've begun to put that in place.
Lisa, when we were talking earlier, you were very clear saying this is not strategic workforce planning.
Correct.
And, this is much more about, we've got a need right now where it's high value. We've got something going on that's low value here, but we've got expertise or capability that's not allocated appropriately, right? That's where we got to make that move and boom, right over here. Where do you've got 200 people working on this particular project, which I find outstanding and astounding. And I'm wondering, how do you staff? What, are there elements for organizations that are looking to do something as well, where you'd say, hey, you know what, these are the core functions or thinkers that we need to have that are a part of this in order to get things going?
Yeah, so this one was actually a bit of we had begun a path around business transformation about 4 years ago with the implementation of what we call global enablement, or a shared services model. And aligned with that was the need then to rethink and improve our technology platforms and take us to we're on SAP, so it's taking us to the next iteration of SAP, that in order for a shared services model to really work effectively, we needed this technology to begin to put in place. And we made the decision to have a global effort in this particular project. So it really started with the project design, right, which would not be a surprise, but it was what are those technology elements of SAP that we're going to be impacting? What are the work processes that have to tie together across the organization, from finance to supply chain, et cetera, and then what are then the skills needed to be able to do that? So it was a it was a organization decision as to how we wanted to support the shared services model of McCormick, and then also, get to the next level of SAP for our entire global organization. So it was defined within the project plan as to what those would be. And then I would say that we did a great job of identifying then what were the skills needed in each of those work streams, what type of people did we need to bring in there, and then how did we start anywhere from a leadership type role to a technical role. That's how we began to staff it. I will say our first go around, we had 140 people. Now we have over 200. So there's definitely learning that goes on there in terms of what it really takes to implement a project of this size. But that it was a very long preparation period before we even launched the project. And it's underway, and it will be for another 4 to 5 years.
Did you, prior to launching this project, did you have some type of repository that allowed you to understand the skills and capabilities of your workforce? Or is this something that's happened as a part of this project that you're going through now?
Yeah, so I would say that from probably back to the technology question, our systems don't yet, but we're actually working on a pilot right now with a group called Degreed about a learning platform, and that eventually will have that opportunity for us to have a repository of skills and to be able to do a search there. We also use SuccessFactors as our HR system and platform, or Employee Central, which we've just upgraded to that version as well. That we can go in and search, but we don't have the repository tool yet to the level of maturity I think that you're describing. So all of these things together, as they continue to evolve, eventually that's where we want to get to, that you can just go in and say, I need this to create this team, and therefore here are these 10 people, which 5 do I want?
That's great.
And I would just ask, Lisa, just out of curiosity, just culturally, like that's a huge thing to ask of managers who have people on their team and they're trying to get their work done. And then there's a project and you're pulling them off the project. And, we've talked to a lot of companies that really struggle with that. So I'm wondering how you've set the expectation and sort of push through that.
Right. I think that's a great way to describe it, is push through. When we first launched it, I will say the team, it was a really well-planned process, and that the reach out into the organization, the clarity of this is what is going to be expected, the top-down buy-in and communication of support that said, we have to do this, and this is what we need from the organization. So here's who you need to work with in order to get this done. So from a framework perspective, very much, I think a really clear way to go about it. In actuality, trying to make those decisions and those transitions, right? It's like, moving someone internally 140 times, all at the same time. So we did have to have some, I'll call it stair stepping of timing. I'll call it deals with, when somebody was going to go, when somebody might come back. And then also the challenge of the person who you're asking to go, which is, what does that mean for my career? And if I come out of my path, what do I do when we're done? And so that's an ongoing conversation as well, but having our managers and HR team equipped to be able to have those discussions and understanding. But it's a challenge. I mean, we still have in the new iteration 30 positions open, so it's not a slam dunk, and it is a challenge because it is a finite amount of people. And as we know right now, in the talent challenge that all organizations are facing, it's not as easy as posting a position and having 1,000 people apply for it.
Right.
And Lisa, just to pick up on something, Maria Zuniga from the audience texted, just picking up on the person piece where you said, how does this affect them on their career trajectory if they're moved from one to another? She said, how can a person be sure, and I would assume that it would be like the manager, I guess, or the person as well, that someone can fit somewhere else instead of the actual project or job that they're working on right now?
That's a great question. One of the criteria that we had as we thought about people for these roles was really around development. Certainly having some basic foundational skills to be thought of, but then also, what are the opportunities for this person to get exposed to a different part of the organization, a different level of, I'll call it leadership skill sets. So we did use our talent discussions and our talent review process and everything that we've got documented as it relates to that as we looked at people. So, and as we had identified which skills were needed in the project, marrying those two to the best of our ability was the way that we approached that. So we did use our talent review, succession planning, career development tools and conversations that we do on a regular basis to help us have that most updated information as to what somebody's skill sets or potential were.
Great. And then one final question, and I know that we want to get on because you're being so generous in what you're sharing here, and we've got more for the audience. This just came in from Amanda Sampson. How is equitability considered in this model? And, in essence, are opportunities transparent and equally accessible? How does an org ensure the same people are not always tapped into, et cetera?
Yeah. So this might segue a little bit also into, well, let me start. So with this particular project, I think it was, I'm going to say because it's such a technical project, right? That gave us the initial place to go hunt for people, right? There's a technical aspect to it. And then on top of that, and because we needed so many people, the net was cast very wide. But I will say, I think our most recent transformation project, which is our global function operating model, which is moving from a decentralized organization to an organization which is strategic control for the functions, I think we've done a much better job of it. And I think, and because we've learned from shared service implementation, we've learned from our ERM project, and now what we've done, because what we've continued to do over all these initiatives is really say, how do we continue to be structured, organized, resourced so that we can attain and exceed our goals, right? Exceed our growth objectives, exceed our performance objectives, exceed our people objectives. And so that's how these things have fit together. So on the right-hand side, the global function operating model, they're building a scalable enterprise that can effectively support our growth strategy. So all of them connected, and we've learned along the way as to how to do something. This one was initiated in 2021, and I think if you go to the next slide, that might be a good place to land. And so this is how we thought of this. And this is another one I'm particularly proud of McCormick in terms of how we've approached this and how we've implemented this. And it's still ongoing. As we mentioned, it just started in 2021. You can see we had done global supply chain. And then this year, March of this year, we made announcements around all of these functions that were all going from a decentralized model to a centralized strategic control functional model, which means that all of our functions are centralized, and then all of our commercial regional teams are focused on growth. So there's dotted lines and things of that nature, but we worked with Deloitte to look at this type of model. How do we want to think of this? And this is where McCormick has landed. It is really an amazing, comprehensive project. And one of the great things I think was really important is that I was a co-sponsor along with our CFO, so that there was both a structural resource efficiency element, but there was also equal focus at all times on the people, how we were going to do it, what we were going to do. And then what I think is really important, and again, personally very proud of this, on the lower in the how, on the last bullet, which is determining the ways of working, now that we've implemented the structure, communicated the changes, putting people into place, we now have a concerted effort, which is led by a governance model, to ensure that we are understanding the ways of working that have changed, how we define them, how we reintroduce them, how we ensure that we are continuing to make sure our structure works. Because so many times, I know I've experienced, you create a structure, you're going to do this, you're going to do this differently, and then priorities change, attention goes elsewhere. But we have a full team working on this in our business transformation organization about ways of working. And it can be something as, I'm going to call it simple, as how do we do time zone management, right? Because now we've got global functions and we can't expect everybody in the organization to be available all the time, to the larger things that we're focusing on right now, like goal setting in a new way, because now dotted lines have changed, direct lines have changed, how our incentive plans are happening, how our cost centers are defined. And so, we're really working on that, as well as just overall org effectiveness. So we also have in place some areas of support for managers, whether it's the first 90 days, whether it's, we call it social motivation. So you get to have team building exercises. So we're trying to look at it holistically to help the organization continue with this transition, with the ultimate goal of supporting the commercial organization, in meeting customer expectations. So I think this is an amazing model that we did embark upon and that we are continuing to work on. And the team that I know, some of them are on the call working on this. And I will say the other piece that we used our own HR restructuring and reformation to look at was, we created two business transformation roles that are agnostic to employee relations and things of that nature, but they're focused on being that person to help these particular areas through these transitions, and also at the same time creating a transformation guidebook so that
Hey, Lisa,
this is going to be something relearn. Oh,
your audio cut out for like about 20 seconds, and I suspect right when you were saying something very important. So I want to just make sure that we don't miss that.
It was after the word transformation guidebook, and then your lips we just weren't hearing anything.
Sorry. So that's always a beautiful visual. But so a transformation guidebook, almost so that when we do this, whether it's small or large projects, we don't have to relearn what we're doing right now. And so we want to learn from our failures as well as our successes, in terms of having something that we can just then, okay, well, we're going to do this. Here's a guidebook of how we have done this and what has worked and what we need to move forward.
Hey, Lisa, just curious, as a result of this, in order to make the global functioning operating model work, is there a particular capability within your HR team where you said, we've got to really build this muscle more to make this work, or a role that became increasingly more important, or a new one you had to create in order to support this?
So we did create the business transformation lead that was a part of the partnering with the organizations, in terms of the implementation. I wouldn't say that we had a new specific skill set that we needed to identify that we didn't have, but it is the ways of working across the organization that is changing for us, which is fundamentally why this is a great model that we've begun to implement. Because what it really does now, because we have HR, both from a HR operations business partner organization and then the remainder of our COEs, how they work together to implement the best practices of the COEs. So the business transformation person and the other HR leaders who need to be partners in implementing this have a clearer opportunity and process to reach into our talent group, our DEI group, our total rewards group, and say, I need your input here. And so I think it's been more a structural efficiency and effectiveness that has changed versus skill sets that we've really needed to change. Our team is strong in org design and org business partnership, understanding the business. I feel my team is awesome and amazing. So to all of you on the call who are on my team, thank you. But it hasn't been so much of a skill gap as it's new ways of working for us too, in terms of how we leverage each other's skills and areas of expertise.
I'm going to take myself off mute. It's almost a microcosm of what you're doing macroly around dynamic allocation of resources, right?
Yes, it's exactly that.
Yeah, fantastic.
Well, and I will say, when we began to design all the functions, the process of doing that was to look at your entire function globally, understand all the positions, where they were, etc. And then based upon what a strategic control functional model needed to have to be successful, how then do you organize around that? And it was a very valuable exercise to be able to say, oh, well, here's what we have people doing. But when you go to this model, you start to reduce duplication because you have the centers of excellence and expertise, as we call them, who then can globally drive through the organization more consistently and remove reinvention and complexity. So it then allows you to either take out resources or reassign resources to positions that are better focused on this type of model.
That's exciting.
It is really exciting, actually. Yeah.
I'd love to just ask one more question about this, just practically.
Yeah.
You're rolling all this out to the organization. You've got people doing work across, however many hundreds of that, many employees. There's got to be a lot of fear for people, does this mean my job's going to be taken away?
Right.
What is that, I'm just wondering how you manage through all that. How are you managing through all that? Because that's just I would imagine there's a lot of, just conversation about what this actually means for me as an employee.
Yeah, great question. So all along with this, as well as the previous project I was talking about, we have a very strong and focused change management group that, doesn't do it all, right, but has helped us design a very comprehensive change management approach that then we can utilize throughout all of this. There was definitely, and the other thing I will say is, and part of that was, as we were going through this process, we were as transparent as we could be, letting people know that we were working on things, letting people know when we would they would hear about something. And then I think we have a really good model of employee touch points through our HR and our managers to really roll out the communications in an organized and respectful way where people were impacted. And those are mainly complete. So we've gone through that process of that, and then certainly have tools and resources for those who stay behind, how to respond to them, how to talk with them, and continue to focus forward on the work that we need to do.
So Lisa, this has been phenomenal. And I know that there's one more area that you wanted to kind of share with the audience. And this is an area that you told us, hey, we continue to evolve and grow here. Everyone is looking at this. But Zeta, if you can go to the next slide, please. But you are revamping or have recently revamped your human capital dashboard, and I'm assuming that something like this is what you're reporting up to the board. Is that correct? Or yes?
Yeah. So this dashboard we implemented at the end of last year. We had its formation, and we had our first official report out in January to the board around this dashboard. And this is illustrative only, and full transparency, again, this is not an automated process. We have over 50 KPIs behind it, we use the Saratoga database to identify which specific metrics should go behind each of these. And so it's still very much a work in progress, but we share this with the board 2 times a year. One is around when we talk to them about talent on an annual basis, and then the other is to give more of a full year perspective on how we're doing. And these are the areas that we feel measure everything that we talk about from a priority perspective in each of our areas of HR, and to also understand, are the things that we're doing making a difference in our metrics. So we look at this from an HR leadership perspective quarterly. The management committee looks at it quarterly, and we also use this as not in this exact format, but some of the data to provide the organization with specific understanding of where our metrics are and how we're doing. So particularly in the DEI space, we've used specific scorecard metrics to talk about progress in this space, which has been a huge priority, not surprisingly, for us in the past 2.5 years. So we're very proud of it. We have automation to do. So that was another technology question. It's a lot of manual gathering to get us to an overall perspective, but we're very pleased with how and what we're looking at, and then how it's linked to our strategies and priorities. And then, and we also use not only the scorecard data, but we have our continuous listening surveys that we use. We have an annual employee engagement. We just launched our first DEI survey. I think I mentioned our MyFlex surveys. And so all of that works together to inform our priorities and strategies as we think about how we operate and what we're doing in the organization with our teams.
And Lisa, with all the pressure from all stakeholders for greater transparency and disclosure of certain human capital metrics,
yeah,
what's the attitude, I guess, at the executive level and above at McCormick when it comes to disclosure? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So are you external disclosure?
External, yes. Thank you.
Yes. So we have, I'll say we have 3 external metrics that we talk about right now, and that is U.S. ethnically diverse talent and global women. U.S. ethnically diverse talent, we have a goal of 30% in senior leadership positions, and global women is 50% by 2025. That plus development, we actually also have that we talk about in terms of development plans. And we actually very proudly, I think we have above 87% of all of our non-exempt or all of our exempt employees have development plans, which is a huge improvement, but we measured it, right? So from an external disclosure perspective, we're more in I'll call it a wait and see, right? We tend not to be out ahead of the curve with things that we are disclosing. And so we're disclosing what we need to right now, quite honestly. And then as and if things change around requirements by the SEC or other organizations, then we'll certainly follow up on those. It's not because we don't want to disclose, but also once you do disclose, there's really no going back, right? So and McCormick, we sometimes we could seem a little slower, but I think there's a slow and steady wins the race as well, to make sure that we really understand the implications and the impact of what we're disclosing, what that's helping, what it's doing for both the company and employees as well.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, we are at our time, and let me just start by saying this. You're already getting shout outs. So you got a shout out from a fellow Spartan, Gary, who I see on there, Gary Randall,
on Gary.
All the transparency that you shared, and really appreciate you. You've been an outstanding guest, and we appreciate on so many levels, Lisa. First off, you're a wonderful member of our Chief HR Officer Board, and we're looking forward to meeting with you and the rest of the board at the end of July. Thank you for that. Thanks for just your general transparency. You're willing to share, some of the lift the hood up and show under the hood what's going on. And Everyone's on a big journey, but thank you for your awesomeness. And I'll leave it to my colleague, Carrie, to close things out.
Well, if I could just say thank you very much. This has been a great opportunity, and thank you very much for allowing me to be here.
And hopefully we made it painless, as we promised we would.
You did. You
So
did.
good.
Yes, it went by very
Promise.
quickly.
Yeah, so thanks so much, Lisa. This has been very educational, and do check out the chat because you are getting a lot of shout outs there. And I think this last slide, just we've got a bunch of different non-member events happening regularly. So make sure to continue to check the website for things that, whether you're a member or not, you can participate in with us. And with that, it is 8:59, my time anyway, in the world. So thanks, Kevin, again, for your great partnership. Thanks again, Lisa, so much. And everybody have a good rest of your day.
Awesome. Awesome. Use Montreal steak seasoning this weekend too, right, Lisa?
Absolutely. Go grilling.
All right. Go grilling. I like that. All right. Take care,
Yeah.
everyone. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
All right.